Yep.
All right. We are ready.
All right. Well, it is 5:09 and we will open up this work session of the Pitkin Board of Trustees and Zoning Board joint work session. Actually, I would like to go ahead and start with, let's do the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag
States of the Republic for which it stands, one nation, under God.
for all.
I should have taken photos on me. I can't see.
And look, free delivery. That makes it so easy to get this.
Oh, somebody's got something on in the background here.
I love how. It's not connected. I think it was Pete.
Okay.
All right.
All right. Well, everyone got the agenda for this evening. And after several discussions here over the past couple months, I think it's a good idea for both the Board of Trustees and the Zoning Board to sit down and hopefully get a few things ironed out. It seems like there's some issues. And so we're going to start with the first thing on there, discuss the communication procedures for all boards. And where I see that is if, we'll just start with the zoning board first. And so if the zoning board is working on an issue or whatever, I think the expectation is that before the agenda goes out, well, let me back up a little bit. That information needs to get sent, whatever you guys want to discuss. So as an individual member of the zoning board, if you have something that you want to discuss, that needs to get sent to Sarah so she can get it on the agenda. Does that sound right? Reasonable?
No,
Okay.
if you'll realize back up the road a few months ago, Sarah refused to start doing the agenda anymore. So Ed Pianault and I have been trying to put it together.
Okay. So we had farther down, there was some discussion about the clerk's role with regard to the duties and functions of the zoning board. So we'll just jump right over to that then.
Can you ask somebody and make sure that they're hearing? Because sometimes when
You were having trouble.
just make.
Lucinda, Roger, can you guys hear us all right?
Good.
Good? All right.
Thank
you. So it's been brought up, the clerk's role with regard to the duties and functions of the zoning board. Sarah, would you like to go over? And I believe we have it in a document as to what the role is for the clerk.
Yes, we will. Let me find that real quickly and I will read it.
Every Democrat and two Republicans voted for Shona Ball, and shared the story about her own pregnancy before attacking Democrats here. And TJ showed who interesting is not.
Sarah, I think you're gonna have to mute Sarah. I think you're gonna have to mute somebody. We're good? All right.
Yes. All right. So I right now am looking at the zoning code and beginning on page 14 under, so it's section 18 B2. And it says, at the direction of the chairperson of the Board of Zoning Adjustment, the town clerk shall post notice of any meeting of the Board of Zoning Adjustment at least 24 hours in advance of such meeting. Notice of Board of Zoning Adjustment meeting shall be posted in accordance with the Town of Pitkin official posting location resolution. Then if you turn the page, we're in section 18, number 5. It says minutes shall be kept of all meetings and are the responsibility of the town clerk. All meeting minutes will be part of the public record.
And that's the end of the description for the duties for the
Correct.
clerk for the zoning board.
Yes.
So Eddie,
So
can,
backing up,
can I ask a question?
sure.
Do we have a job description for any of the town employees? That would spell out what, so, because what's happening is we've got a town clerk that serves several boards.
Right.
So we have some that stated in the zoning board or zoning code what the town clerk's supposed to do. I don't know if there's even anything anywhere else that explains what she's supposed to do for the board of trustees. So I'd make a strong recommendation that for any town employees, we start off with having a job description that pulls it all together in one spot.
Do we have that, Sarah?
We do not. I will say there are some responsibilities that are listed in statute. I may be able to pull that up here in the next couple of minutes, but as far as the town having generated a job description, we do not have that.
We didn't. I thought we had. Okay.
Not,
So-
not for clerk, we do for only the commissioners.
We have
Okay.
job descriptions for all the commissioners.
Okay. So I would agree. I think that's probably a good start. We need to get a job description put together as to what the duties are and expectations of the board. And then we can also outline if the board wants the clerk to be involved in the zoning board, what duties are expected on that too. So,
I agree. A good place to start.
Sarah,
Yes.
are you good with that?
Potentially. I mean, I think that I would request that if the zoning board has additional duties that they would like me to be performing, that we have a discussion about that before they're officially added to my job description.
Well, there'll be a discussion before any job description is finalized and approved, but. So I guess what I would say is if the zoning board wants to get something put together as to what they would like to see. As far as help from the clerk. If you put that together,
I think we can do that. I'd say to start first of all, with starting with the job description. With pulling information from the statutes and from the zoning code, and then we can work on that too.
Okay. That makes sense, doesn't
I
it?
like that.
Okay, if you would do that for us, so whatever's already. What all we already have, we don't need to rewrite that, so.
I can also, from time to time, a job description will circulate on the listserv as well, so I could pull from some of those.
Okay. So let's go back to communication procedures for the board. So right now, it sounds like we don't have well, actually, we do have a pretty clear path for things to get on the agenda on the zoning board.
So let's clarify that. So what's your perception then as the path for things to get on the agenda?
Well, for right now, I would say that the zoning board members would send information to the chairman, and the chairman can, whether they want to do it by themselves or they want to help one person or the group or whatever, develop an agenda. Is that,
I'm fine with that.
And yes, it's basically, Pianola and I basically been doing it recently. But I always call Sarah to see if there's something that comes to her for an appeal or a variance or public comments, any of those things. And normally there isn't anything, but been trying, and first time or two, we left off word to vote, discuss and vote. We left off one time, so we're not perfectionists.
no, but
Sure.
and I think that's something too, is we can work with the clerk and maybe develop a template that makes it easy to have an agenda and be able to say, okay, we need to have these items for sure on there. And if it is something that needs to be voted on, this is the procedure
And
for that.
And I think what we've done recently or the last several meetings is we've actually taken the agenda that Sarah had created, and I'm using that as the template
Okay,
to make sure.
Yeah. that you're getting all that.
Is on there and
Yep.
everything's on there. So I would ask this because I feel like there's there's been, I don't know if you want to call it animosity or what. I think Sarah does a very good job of proofreading stuff. So if we send an agenda to her and we see something, you know, like the vote is missing or something, that, I mean, she'll bring it up to say, hey, do you want to add that on or not? And that's all I'd ask on that.
Well, I guess that's what I would ask is as we're developing this job description, you guys want that in there, then you would,
Yeah.
what I would say is just include that as part of what you're asking for in the job description is for the clerk to review the agenda to make sure that it's correct.
I agree. That's good.
My current challenge is getting the information of recommendations from the zoning board on items to the Board of Trustees.
Okay,
We are short-handed there. We're not getting it done.
okay.
And so instead of being a week behind, we're 5 weeks behind. If we get it on the agenda then for the trustees. So that's just that communication thing. And not everybody reads the zoning board minutes. Not everybody reads the trustee minutes. Therefore, we have a gap.
So what I would suggest on that is back to what we're talking about. Once you guys have the agenda put together, depending on what comes out of the job description, if it is something that's going to go to the town clerk for review to make sure that it's good, and then you would ask her or ask whoever's doing the town clerk to make sure that we got to make sure it gets on the website. That's one of the things I think that when we're talking about communication is to make sure that if there's whatever's going to be discussed at the meeting is out there on the website. So everyone knows this is the agenda and this is what's going to be discussed.
Yeah.
So,
And that's good. I don't know if Roger Law has anything to add to us for our meetings or not.
Roger, you got comments?
You unmute. He can.
He's-
unmute himself.
It shouldn't be.
He shouldn't.
You need to unmute yourself.
Oh, I'm trying.
There we go.
Yeah, I think what you're getting around to is very important to keeping the community as well as all the board, whether it's the zoning board, trustees, the whole people, group of people that govern, keep them on the same page. We don't want to see zoning board wander off into doing things that the zoning board or the town board of trustees later has to apologize for or say, oh, well, we didn't get that right. Although we're all going to make mistakes from time to time, if we have better communications, I think we can work through all of this a little bit easier. And so I think it is important. And it's a small town, small handful of people run it. There's only a very small handful of people who live there. Most of the houses in the town are owned by summer home folks. Yeah, it's big responsibility on a small number of people that are involved. So, yeah, we got to work together. Whatever we can do to make that work, I think is vital and important.
All right, well, I think communication is important. So hopefully we're starting to get some things kind of lined out here as to a procedure for how it's going to happen. Ramon?
Yeah, a couple of things. First of all, on the agendas, I just want to make it clear that posting the agenda, it's absolutely necessary that Sarah is involved. First, it has to go on the website and she's the one who does that.
Right.
Second is the bulletin board, which is the second official place of the town inside the post office. That is actually government property. And so not anyone can post there, and I allow the town to do that. Basically, I'm the one who decides. And so the posting of the agenda or anything else for the town, I want to go through Sarah, because it can't get out of hand, as anyone who's stopped for 2 minutes to look at the outside bulletin board can see. That one basically belongs to the town and the community association. And so I don't have anything to do with that. But, okay, and then the second thing, I'd like to bring up, I think I included it in my notes, is information. And I think everybody needs to start understanding this, that if you want something not only on the agenda, but to have any sensible discussion on it, the information has got to be provided and distributed early, not the day of the meeting or even close to that. I know when I was with the county, we had a policy that anything had to be in at least a week, 7 days before the meeting. That may be a little too long here, but somewhere in between that, 4 or 5 days or something. If you want something on the agenda, don't just call Sarah and say, I want this on the agenda. Provide information of what it needs to be about. And all our meetings are public, but and I'm I'm a real advocate of public input. Yeah, but it's hard to get public input that's basically to the point and understandable if the public doesn't have the information ahead of time. And so I think that's real important for everyone on both boards to understand that, if you want something discussed or acted on or any other facet at an upcoming meeting, get the information that's needed ahead of time to Sarah. She can distribute it to whatever boards are necessary, put it on the website and all of that type of thing. But trying to do that, getting it to Sarah at the last minute just doesn't make for good meetings.
So currently, the policy is for Board of Trustee meetings, it has to be in by
I believe it's the Wednesday before.
the Wednesday before.
Correct.
And would you be comfortable for the zoning board the same way? You guys would request your information in at least by Wednesday, and we can say whatever time we want to set, Wednesday at 5 or whatever, but
The one, it's not an issue, but the question I have is, we have to post it by 24 hours in advance?
I thought it was 48. Was it 24?
24.
So if, let's say a variance comes into Sarah, comes into the town clerk, but it doesn't come in to Thursday before our meeting on Monday, we have 45 days, I believe, that we have to listen to that variance. So that's my only question, is pushing it to Wednesday. Does that allow us enough time if something comes in on Wednesday night or Thursday to the town clerk? That's just a question. I don't know.
Well, there's rarely 45 days between meetings. And so that would be 40, or, approximately 1 month. So 30, 31 days plus another 4. So even if it was to have to be pushed out a month because somebody didn't
Didn't
get
get
their
it in.
information out of time, then it could still be heard in that amount of time.
Should be.
It's,
I agree with you. I just think people in town in the past have sent stuff in at the last minute and expect it to be on. And
well, and I think that's something that we need as both boards to clarify and
yes,
put out there that this is the cutoff date and this is the time, whatever time, if we want to say 5 o'clock on Wednesday, if that's agreeable with the zoning board. What is it now, Sarah, for the board? It's Wednesday at 5 also.
I'm sure it says 5. Yeah, I can
Yeah.
double check. It's just,
So-
it's not even an official policy. It's just.
I think that that's something that we need to get out on the website. And we can even post it at the post office and say the cutoff date for items to be included on the agenda is the prior Wednesday to the board meeting by 5 p.m.
Yes,
And-
that's what it says. It also says supporting documentation must also be submitted no later than 5 p.m. on the Wednesday before the meeting.
Yeah. So,
Where you see, is that just for the Board of Trustees?
It's on the agenda. It's at the bottom of the agenda for the Board of Trustees.
Okay, then we need to put that on the
On
bottom
the-
of the agenda for the,
for the zoning board also. Yep.
That's a good idea.
Yeah. Yep.
okay. So, along that same line, I want to ask a question. If any information comes to the zoning board or comes to the chairman, I don't know if we need to be the ones deciding, is this for open public consumption or does this not read to public? So I'm only asking for clarification. If we receive something like that, do we send it to the town clerk? Because a lot of times, any of the stuff we've had in the past, she sends it out to all the zoning board members. Trying to keep us clean on the opens meeting law too, the way she sends it out. I
Mhm.
appreciate that. But does everything, I mean, not everything needs to be posted on the website, I don't believe. You may have some stuff that comes in,
Right.
don't want posted out there. I just want to be clear on who makes that determination.
Well, what I would say is the initial filter is going to be the chairman of the zoning board. Whatever they receive, they're going to filter it and say, oh, and it may be a decision to say, you know what? This doesn't need to be heard by the zoning board. It needs to go to the board of trustees. So then the chairman, whoever that might be, will forward that to Sarah.
I normally try to poll my board before we put it on the agenda to see what the rest of it.
So that may be problematic because of open meeting laws. So I would say that historically, if the zoning board members are confused about whether or not something should be a part of the meeting, then that starts with you and you make that determination. And if you're unsure, then it may be that you can reach out to maybe your vice chair of the zoning board. But I just want to kind of
Yes.
expand a little bit on meeting packets. Regardless of whether something goes on the website for public consumption, if a board is supposed to review information to have an educated discussion about any item, I have to be able to send out that information ahead of time. And so if the zoning board, for example, shows up at a meeting and half or more of the zoning board is seeing information for the first time, and I wasn't able to disperse that because it wasn't sent to me, then that puts the zoning board at a very high disadvantage of being able to have a discussion, to be able to ask the tough questions that the town is expecting of the zoning board. So typically, any information that any board needs to discuss, it needs to come to the town so that I can disperse it to all members of that board. That's the Board of Trustees as well as the zoning board.
I have tried very hard not to be a one-man board. And I don't like one-man boards. And so that's the reason I try to be visible or whatever you want to call it.
Well, and I think that the caution here has got to be the zoning board, just like the board of trustees, falls under the sunshine law, open meetings. And everyone needs to recognize that if you have, especially if you have 3 members of the board and you start discussing something, that's a problem.
Yeah.
So you have to be very cautious, not coming together, talking about it, but if you get on the phone together and 2 of you are at one house and one's at another house and you guys are talking about it, that can be a problem.
I'm very aware of that. But
All right.
what about a one-on-one? Is that open meetings violation?
My understanding is no.
That was my understanding. That's where
But-
you try to poll.
Here's the caution is, what does it look like? To the
Well, what's
public?
it look like when
That's-
3 of the trustee board members happen to be at the Silver Plume for coffee on a day, or at the lodge for supper one night?
And you're right, actually. and-
If you want to
and
get technical,
I'm not saying not to do it. What I'm saying is you need to be careful about what does it look like? And especially if something comes up where there's a board meeting and 3 of the members know about it and the rest of the members don't know about it,
agreed.
that presents,
Red flags.
it doesn't look good.
So if I could just add something else, with the Board of Zoning Adjustment, one of your primary responsibilities is to hear variances. And that is considered by the state of Colorado a quasi judicial procedure. And so that means that any conversation that you have outside of when the board meets as a whole could be considered an ex parte communication. So what you have to keep in mind is that all the information that the Board of Zoning Adjustments is going to consider in the case of a variance, you can kind of picture it as putting it in one folder. And everybody gets all the information in that one folder. And so if there's extra communication, so just for example, if Ed and Gayla, take a walk around town and they're chit-chatting about it and they're formulating opinions and they're considering, well, my neighbor said this, well, my neighbor said that, that's not in the folder for the whole board to consider. And that needs to be disclosed at the time of
Of the
the
hearing. Mhm.
Exactly. And so in a case like that, or in a case, where there's another, I think that's the primary quasi judicial procedure that happens at a zoning board. But again, if the board needs to meet more than once to talk about it, rather than maybe 2 members of the board meeting and talking about it, those 2 members should say, let's call an extra meeting and we'll all sit around and we'll hash it out. Because what that does, not only is it kind of keeps everybody's nose clean, but it also allows the public to see the commitment that every member of the zoning board has to say, hey, we're going to have all of our discussions about this quasi judicial procedure, this variance. We're going to do all of this in the light. And so I think that's one really important point to remember. So whether or not technically there's a rule about, 2 people maybe having to mention something, that might be something that you'd want to mention. Hey, Ed and I were walking and he said, hey, what do you think about such and such? And then I said, well, let's talk about that at the meeting. And then the conversation ended. You still should disclose that.
Yep.
Just to let the public know, hey, or, as somebody, if your neighbor comes up to you and says, I heard that there's going to be a variance hearing and I want to talk about it, you can say, come to the public hearing and give your comments to the whole board so that the whole board can consider. If you receive an email from a member of the community and it's just addressed to one person of the zoning board, but it is about a variance, you're obligated to send that so that the whole board can look at it, so that they can all be considering the same information in that file. So I think really it's important to consider the spirit of what it is that you're doing. And instead of getting caught up in like the rules and the lines and the regulations, let's think about what's our goal here. And the goal should be to have the whole conversation with the whole board, all information, all in public.
So right in with what you just said about the one-on-one. No, is that a violation of the sunshine law? No, but if you're talking about a variance, then it does become that. So
Right, and you may have to recuse.
that's,
And
and that's
it doesn't help anybody because
Yeah,
they need
exactly.
input.
Have we had a problem with this? Because I guess because we've sat on so many boards for so long, I just assumed that everybody knew all of this. I'm shocked actually that we've had to be, or I'm not saying it's wrong to bring it to our attention, but I'm shocked that I
I can
I
answer that
guess,
question if you like.
okay.
Yes, there has been a problem. So, just most recently, and again, this isn't to lay blame there. We have new members on boards and we're working through these, growing pains. But for the last zoning board meeting, there were, I believe, 3 items on the agenda where one member of the zoning board had information for these 3 items and held on to it and then passed it out at the meeting. So I didn't have it. And at least 3 other members of the zoning board didn't have access to it ahead of the meeting to be able to look it over, ask questions, prepare for the discussion.
So I want to address that a little bit. That's separate than what you're talking about with the open meeting law and the variances.
Well, it falls under the, why do we have to share information?
It falls under it, but I guess what I'm looking for is where are our policies and procedures that say when we need, and that's what I think that's what we're defining now, what needs to be sent out, when it needs to be sent out.
Everything,
What was that, Lucinda?
everything.
And
Everything
that's-
has to be sent out.
And you know, it's interesting because there are some things that I do get, like Mr. Pianalto every month sends me the spreadsheet and says, please disperse this. So I believe that there is a level of knowledge that things need to come through me and be dispersed for everybody to see, but yet there have been certain documents that have been withheld, and that really just kind of cripples the board. And so that's one thing that's kind of happened recently that definitely the town should work out the kinks and state clearly, if it's going to be discussed, everybody has to have it.
And what I would say is, what happened in the past has happened in the past.
I agree.
We're looking to the future. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to improve and make sure that
Right.
both boards operate per the state statutes. And also, as I mentioned, it's not only about, it's just like with the sunshine law. Yes, 2 people can meet and talk. But if somebody overhears that discussion, what does that lead to? So a lot of it is, it's not only the law, but it's also the public perception. We want to, the way I look at it is, moving forward, we want to do things as upright and as open and transparent as possible. So that's.
Yes, I agree with that. I did have a question, but it's kind of like a few paragraphs back. Did I forget it? Oh, no, I know. We're talking about timeliness and when things get posted and such. And when we live, you know, and we all are very aware in this little town at this altitude, our season for construction and getting anything done is so much smaller than anywhere else, maybe in the world, I don't know. So I would hope that whether it's the trustees or the zoning board that, and I know we're gonna create some kind of policy or talk about it anyway at some point for the timing, but I would hope we could do, like, I quote Rachel a lot, but to try to be as helpful as we can with it, because people can run into big problems that are very costly if we shove them down the road.
I don't think, and you know, I've heard this expression probably a whole lot more than what I would like to, but this whole thing about kicking the can down the road. I don't think we've done that personally. I'm sure other people have other opinions about that, but here's my opinion is, and this is the way it's gonna be, is if there's a deadline, there's a deadline. And if someone doesn't get their information in, whether it's to the zoning board or to the board of trustees by the deadline, how do we say, okay, well, you know what? It's a short construction season, so we're gonna allow this one in, but the next one we're not.
Yeah, I'm sorry that you feel so hard-nosed about that, Eddie. I'm just saying, things come up and I don't know, have you been in construction? I have not.
Yeah, I have been in construction.
Okay, well, sometimes things come up at the last minute and I would just hate to see people, and I'm not saying that it would be playing favorites or anything, but there are times when I just hope we as a town, whether this is zoning board or the board of trustees, could take into consideration of being helpful, if possible, when we can. Thank you.
And the way I see that we're gonna be helpful is we're gonna try to get the word out that if you have something that you want on the agenda, here's the date.
I totally
And
agree with
then
you.
the way I look at it is, it's their responsibility to get whatever, you know, and I understand, they may be waiting on an engineer to get a report put together. But do we say, you know what? Okay, and we don't know, maybe they went to the engineer 3 months ago, or maybe they went to the engineer 3 days ago. We don't know. And if they come in and they say, you know what, I'm waiting on this stuff from the engineer, will you go ahead and put it on the agenda? I'm gonna have a very difficult time saying yes.
Yes, and I understand something like that, but things, things in life happen. Tragedies happen, things bad happen. So I would just hope that we could take into consideration, and I'm all for, we need to broadcast this and anything, but I think Sarah had a good idea too, in that we could have a special meeting, and I would hope we would be, if maybe our helpfulness is that. But we just need to be, I just, we're a little town, and we love our little town. We want it to prosper. And from here on, I would like us to, and if it takes a special meeting instead of something about the agenda, I'm not talking about people delaying or being irresponsible. Sometimes things in life happen. So that's all. But I think we're mostly all in agreement here.
And I think you came up, I think you came up with something we can consider. Maybe there needs to be a special meeting. So,
Section 18C. B. Within 15 days, calendar days of receiving a completed variance application, the chairperson of Board of Zoning Adjustments shall convene the Board of Zoning Adjustment for a review of the requested variance, then notification and on. So when Sarah gets a completed variance request, we have 15 days to hear and to act. Now, it may not be our monthly meeting, but
That's-
we have it written here in the ordinance.
so that's
That
the point
clarifies
right
it.
there. And to me, that's trying to be pretty helpful, is to say, you know what? You got it in, and we don't have another meeting lined up within 15 days, so there's gonna have to be a special meeting.
Yep.
Does that sound?
And we have 24 hours to get that posted. I mean, it has to be at least 24 hours.
Right,
For the meeting.
Yeah.
right, for the meeting, so.
Eddie? May I say something?
No.
Okay.
Yes, go ahead, of course you can.
I think there's a very strong operative word in that sentence that a lot of people don't pay attention to, and that is a completed packet. I saw an awful lot of things while on the town board in the last 30 years that you would not be allowed to present that because it wasn't all full. There wasn't an ILC, there wasn't a piece of paper that needed to be with it, there wasn't a plan. And so we need to be very cognizant when we look at things to say, did we get everything we need? Is there anything we do need?
Yeah, I
That's
think
just-
that's key. A complete.
It is complete.
At the zoning, excuse me, Cindy, at the zoning board meeting, when we're going over this, sometimes we find things that have not necessarily been omitted, but in order for us to make a justified judgment call, we need more information.
Right.
And so that's when we requested, and it didn't come to our knowledge until we had the meeting. So there's, except call kicking down the road, I don't care what you call, but we need to have it clean so we can act properly.
And to me, that's not kicking the can down the road.
I agree.
That's asking for information that maybe should have been provided and wasn't, or it came up during the hearing that, you know what, we need some more information for that.
Yes.
Sarah?
Just with regard to Jesse's comment just now, I've, over the last couple of weeks, looked over a couple of and have been reading a little bit, and there are many towns where prior to a board, especially the Board of Zoning Adjustments, receiving a variance application specifically, there's a staff review. And so that might be something that the board might want to consider. So, again, here in Pitkin, I get CC'd on emails and I see that they're being sent to a lot of just random different people. But if any member of the zoning board receives the packet, it may be a smoother procedure if they want to turn that into me and I can check and make sure that everything is included in that packet. And if it's not, I can bump it back to the requester and say, you need X, Y, and Z. So that way it's not coming to the board, being heard at a meeting, and then having to go back. You can all, those kinds of missing pieces, contingency building portion gets to the meeting before it gets dispersed to the rest of the board. So that can be something for consideration.
And I'm always devil's advocate, but in that situation, does that make a one-man board requesting from the petitioner? and
Not at all.
Board?
It is a staff review for completion
We
of the.
don't have a staff.
I'm
Yeah,
the staff.
well,
Okay, you're the staff, all right.
she's the staff.
And I would not be approving or disapproving anything other than
Right.
just checking the boxes to see if all required documents are included in the packet.
In the application.
Some places do
Right.
have staff that
Sure.
make recommendations to the board before the board even
Right.
hears the variance,
Yeah.
but I think that's a bit too far.
Yeah.
Amen for us.
That may be something we roll in for the job description.
Mhm.
You know, this is something that is difficult to deal with in a little town like us because we don't have staff for this, that, and the everything else. But that doesn't mean that the application or applicant should be sloppy about what they're presenting either.
Exactly.
How many times, you know, there's a lot of people sitting around this table that are either on the zoning board or have been, or basically everyone here has dealt with matters of the zoning board. And how many times have you had something that, oh, where's the plat on this? We don't have a plat. How can we, you know, make an
Informed decision.
Yeah. So I think it's really incumbent on, you know, not just Sarah, but, you know, the members of both boards who are gonna have to deal with, you know, something incoming to be able to say, and not be bashful about saying, you don't have enough information here. You need to get a plat. You need to get an engineer, whatever.
Yeah.
You know, various things that too often, and maybe this even should be pointed out at the meetings a little bit more, you know, because what you mentioned, kicking the can down the road, usually that happens because you don't have all the information. And, you know, I have an accountant who's really great, and for years, she's had this sign on her wall that I see every time I go into her office. It says, failure to plan ahead on your part does not create an emergency on my part.
Yep.
Says a lot.
So, well, I think along the lines of communication, that's a lot of it. We need to let our citizens know that these are the expectations. If you want to present something, if you want something considered, here's the route to take. And I think we can get a document put together that's basically a step-by-step process. If it's for this, if it's for a variance, you need to do this. If it's for something else, these are the steps.
Since we were talking about variances, and I'm just happen to have the book for the zoning code open to this, it states that variance requests have to be mailed via USPS. Do we allow variances to be handed to the town clerk?
I think we have,
We have.
yeah.
Just, I don't want us to be so firm that we say, nope, it said right here, we have to have it mailed. You have to mail it. I think we've got to be reasonable.
I think we need to add or hand deliver to the clerk or the chairperson of the zoning board.
I think a lot of this should be added in zoning code as we update it
Sure.
to say when it's due by and
To reflect some of these things that we're discussing, so.
So if I could just make a comment on that, this may be easier to write just a process document for the entirety of the town. I
I like
think that having the same procedures for every board would be
especially helpful with the public. Items are due by Wednesday. This is how you deliver. If it's incomplete, the clerk's gonna give it back and just have it like that. And then because this is something new that we haven't really done before on paper,
Yeah.
maybe just putting it into a process document, because that would allow us to do some trial and error and get in there and rewrite it as needed.
Instead of going into the code and
Getting it
revising the
to
code.
it's a-
I
it's a huge
Totally
deal.
agree with that. That'd be brilliant. Much easier to have it for all the boards. I mean, building permits for the zoning code, for Board of Trustees.
Right, that way everybody knows.
Everybody knows this is the problem, and we don't have different processes for different things.
Amen.
And what we've got to do when we do that is if there's a conflict like that one where it says it has to be mailed, we need to figure out legally what we need to do to address that, if we're gonna have to go back at some point to adjust the code or not. But we can at least get this put together and then find out, okay, this is a conflict. How do we address it?
Would you like me to start working on a draft for that?
Yes, please.
Amen.
All right, other discussions about communication.
So I do have another, I think Jesse kind of brought it up. So if the zoning board does have a recommendation that we want to send to the Board of Trustees, how do we want to send it to the Board of Trustees?
Well, what I would think the way it would work is zoning board chairman would say, we've met at this meeting, we've discussed this, this is the recommendation of the board. And then it could get forwarded to Sarah to disperse to the Board of Trustees.
Okay, I'm good with that other than I think somewhere the mayor has to decide this goes on the agenda or doesn't.
I do.
Yes, okay.
Okay.
That was
I
my
do.
question.
That's
All I'm asking.
Sarah and I, every month, she sends out a draft and we start going over it. So
Now, that was my
the
question.
mayor is involved every month on the agenda.
Should, yeah.
I got just one final thing on this subject of it. And, you know, this is something that I think is a big part of the reason that communication gets gaps in. That at many meetings, many issues, we don't have all the information on. And what I would like to see done, and I found this as a regular thing that we did on the planning commission that worked, is when you get to the end of an issue at a meeting and you can't go any further because you don't have the information, I think it's really incumbent on the chair, which be you two with these two boards, to wrap that up and be very specific to whoever has to deal with it. Sometimes it's an internal thing. Other times it's, you know, an applicant for variance or whatever. But the last thing is that you should be doing is telling whoever needs to provide more information exactly what you need. And get this to us at the next meeting, we can deal with it. Too often it's kind of left. What
So,
do you need to finish this?
so my recommendation then is if we have something that's not finalized, then before we move on to the next thing, we have a recommended action. That's kind of what you're headed for, right?
Yeah.
A recommended action. And when we talk about the recommended action during that meeting, it can be, you know what? The board needs this, or the applicant needs to provide that, or whatever needs to follow up along with to be able to finalize
Right.
at the next meeting, to be able to say, okay, at the last meeting, here was the recommended actions. Where's the checklist?
Mhm.
That,
And doesn't that follow on a tabled item that in the motion, it would list what was not presented and what we're requesting for the next meeting?
I think we just make it as recommended actions. And
No, you don't table them, just to make a recommended action. So does that take a vote, or does that just take the consensus that the chair feels, or?
I would say that you're gonna have a board discussion, hopefully, as to what else is needed. And then, oh, Sarah, do you have?
No, I think probably, I was gonna say what you were gonna say, is that the item would be tabled, and there would be a recommended action, so that the item wouldn't have to continue to be tabled.
Yeah, that's what I like. I don't like the chair making a decision. I want the board to make a decision, and then the applicant knows.
The way I see this is that the board discussion, when it comes to the end and somebody's gonna make a motion to table that, then part of that motion is gonna be, and the recommended action is going to be A, B, C, D.
Table until.
Table until, and it maybe, you know what, it's gonna be table until we have to set a special meeting to be able to accommodate getting this done on time, or table until the next regular.
So I think your key there, Eddie, is if it was on the agenda as discuss and vote, and it can't be voted on, there has to be a motion to move it to the next meeting, and it's in that motion then that you state what you say. You can't, according to Robert's Rule of Order, you can't have a discussion vote and you discuss it and you don't vote on it. You're tabling it to the next meeting. Can't table it unless you have a motion. But that motion can be, we're gonna table it to the next meeting or to whenever. And this is what we need from the property owner in that motion.
The thing that I see with that is probably not a lot of the time, but some of the time there are items that have been put on the agenda and it says discuss and vote, just so we have that ability to be able to vote. And so there are certainly some times that there's no need to vote. It's the end of the whatever's been brought forward. It's not being tabled until the further meeting. It's just basically the end of that discussion. And
I have a suggestion that it's a regular part of both the county commissioners and the zoning board. You might have seen it on your agendas on the environmental board. Instead of discuss and vote, put in discuss possible action. Then it's up to the board.
yeah. Sarah, are you good with that?
Either way, yeah, so whatever the board prefers, it is.
I think it makes it a little bit, because if we're following Robert's Rules of Orders, that way we're not doing the wrong thing.
Yeah.
So if we change it to that, is discuss and what was the wording again?
Possible
Possible action. So, yep.
This is Tom. So, so we give the applicant a recommendation of actions in order, and a recommendation is a nice word. But you gotta have these documents, so this is going over. So.
And I think you're right.
These are necessary.
At the meeting,
Necessary.
these are recommendations from the board. This is a requirement. If you want further action on this, we have to have these things.
Wednesday before the meeting.
Yeah.
Right.
5
Yes.
o'clock.
Yes. So, no, I agree. I think that's a good,
Could either board, I'll just say it was either board. Say we're at that meeting and the property owner, whomever, sees that they've missed something, they don't have something. The possible action could also be to set a special meeting to
Yeah,
hear that.
exactly. Yep.
Which could be the next day or a week later.
Well, it's got to be noticed and
Gotta be noticed.
yeah. So,
So, okay.
no, I think that can be part of the recommendation. Recommended action could be from the board saying, you know what? You bring us this, we'll set a special session to address this. With at that point, could be required information. I mean, the way I look at it is if we're gonna set a special session, they need to understand that this is required. And if you don't have this information there's not gonna be a special session. So we're not going to go to the trouble of doing that if they're not willing to get the information, as Sarah said, by Wednesday prior to the meeting. Any other discussion on communication? Does this give, hopefully, everyone on the boards a little bit better idea on how communication should flow and how it's going to flow? Roger? You got any comments out there?
I think you're on the right path here. And, yeah, there's, a lot of information that, what kind of a packet you need to put together for a certain procedure, whether it's a variance, building permit, sewer permit, various different things that has to include, some very specific documents, what you're gonna do, where it's gonna go. Tom sees it, how many bedrooms, bathrooms, whatever, to qualify for, this and that. It's a complicated procedure. And most of the, builders in the Pitkin area that's dealt with this or dealt with Gunnison County, which is a much more complex procedure. Takes about 3 months to get a building permit out of those guys. But yeah, none of this is gonna happen without an awful lot of information. And they need to know.
Uh-oh.
Froze.
Was frozen.
Must be cold.
Decision.
Oh, did we lose? Oh, there you are. You're back.
Couldn't get across the bridge.
Gotta be,
We lost you
Someone
there for a
sit
minute, but
on.
I think we've got the gist of what you're saying is we're headed down the right path. We need to get, and I think that's a lot of it is we need to develop some good procedural documents as to what's required for each type of application. Anything else?
I just want to add that if there is a request of the zoning board to do something like a fence, there is required a site plan. And whoever's in charge of getting this on the agenda needs to make sure that it's accurate, a detailed enough, not just dots on a page. A detailed enough site plan comes along with that request.
Well, I think that all falls under what we're talking about, having a procedure that's, you know what, you want to do a fence, you want to do whatever. Here's the procedure for that. And here's the checklist that needs to be provided. And we can, like I said, I believe we can set up that, you know what, if you're asking for a variance, this is the path you take. If you're asking for a permit for a fence, this is the path you take. If you're asking for a building permit for a house, this is the path you take.
OWTS, well,
If it's any of it. So I think we can develop something that's pretty easy for the public to understand and be able to see, okay, I want to do this. Okay, here's step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is what I need to do. And then at the end of that, this is where it goes. Does it go to the zoning board? Does it go to town clerk or what? So I think we can get all that defined and in print and on the web page so people can see that and hopefully make it a lot easier for them.
And us.
And yes, and us. Exactly. This is a two-pronged thing, right? All right. Well, if there's no other discussion on the communication procedures, I think we have a pretty good start on that. The next item, discuss the role, duties, hierarchy, and procedural interaction between the Board of Trustees and the zoning board. So it was brought up and we actually went to our attorney and talked about having a member on the zoning board and on the Board of Trustees. And Sarah can jump in here too, but it was my understanding is that from Clay, he actually seemed to think that's a good idea, to have a liaison between the two. And there certainly isn't any kind of legal problem, it didn't seem like with that. Was there anything else, Sarah, that you,
I think that was just the gist of it. It wasn't, I wouldn't even say a conversation, more just a question and a response.
so. So if there's any questions about that, that should pretty much explain. That's why we have one member that's on zoning board and also on the board of trustees and what, another hat? Did you say ditch commissioner too? Is that?
No.
Was there any other discussion on that, on the procedural interaction between the board of trustees and the zoning board? Are there questions about how it should work, why it should work?
Yes, Tom, I think in the previous collage of discussion that you covered that.
That's what I was hoping to hear.
One
Could you
question
repeat
I
that?
might have,
Go ahead.
That was Lucinda.
For clarification, without stepping on anybody's toes, when a permit was turned down by the building inspector, what rights or anything did the applicant have?
Well, I would believe in reviewing the zoning code, and I haven't gone through the whole thing, but I don't know that there's anything in the zoning code that applies for that. It says if something gets turned down by the building inspector, that it should go to the zoning board.
That was where it.
You guys have
the
something that
appeal-
you,
The appeal came to the zoning board.
right, but we don't know if that was correct or not. And that's what we're discussing here was, is that the correct process?
That's what my
And so,
question is.
and if you can show me something in the zoning code that says this is the step,
Well-
then we need to address that. And if it's not in there, then what we're going to do is we develop this template on the process of, okay, you apply for a fence permit and it gets turned down. What's the next step?
Or OWTS,
Or
or
whatever,
law.
right? All of that, what I would like to see is all of that in a document spelled out. These are the steps. And if it's step C, you've applied and it gets turned down, what's the next process?
Well, I like an appeals process. And our attorney mentioned at one of the meetings that we listened to that we weren't in attendance. He said that he liked more steps of appeal instead of having to go straight from rejection to the courts. And when the applicant appealed to the zoning board with the knowledge that I had, I felt like we should hear the case, even though we maybe couldn't act on it, but to make a recommendation to the trustees. And that's the process we took. And I just,
So what I brought up before, we're not looking behind us. We're looking to the.
no, I'm looking
So,
forward.
so what we want is in this document that we're gonna put together, if a fence permit gets denied, this is the next step. And I believe in Clay's statement about not going directly to the courts, as long as the board is not the one that denied the fence permit first, there is an appeal process.
Okay.
Whether it ends up being the zoning board or with us,
Going forward,
those are things that we need to get into this document. And part of it is we need to go through the zoning code and say, okay, what are the duties of the zoning board? And if it's not spelled out, the way I look at it is if it's not spelled out in the zoning code that it's a duty of the zoning board, then it falls to the board of trustees.
Yeah, and I agree with you, Eddie, that when you read the zoning code, it's vague. It's not spelled out. As an example, section 16 on page 12 talks about administration enforcement. The code shall be administered by the zoning board of adjustment. Enforcement recommendations will be made to the board of adjustment and trustees. That goes right in the building permits. It's part of the code. So it's an interpretation as to if someone is denied, the zoning board would listen to the appeal. It's not clear. And that's what we've got to have is clear.
So I think that's something that, and Sarah, if you'll make a note on that,
Yep.
we will get with the attorney and get his see if he can clarify that for us.
On
and-
that
And
subject,
provide us with some direction as to,
on that subject that's not clear also, when Tom gets an application for well or building permit or fence or any permitting, and it comes to two of the zoning board members to approve, if we don't get two signatures on there, does it die? And then the applicant comes to the zoning board? These are things that need to go forward in this, address it in
So these
the
need-
document.
that needs to be in the document.
Yes.
So I don't know if you're making notes. Hopefully Sarah's getting some of this
trying.
down. So these are all things that I see in the document, which is gonna help everyone, I believe, because you're gonna have direction.
Especially the zoning board.
If somebody comes up and says, hey, Tom denied this, I want you to address it.
Yeah.
You can say, you know what? Wait just a minute. Here's the document, A, B, C. Oh, sorry, you know what? It needs to go that way, or yes, we can talk about that.
I think that that's the simple part of it. There's another part that is really, germane to as a town. Having the process, it goes from this person to this board to that board, whatever. That's one thing, but I think that kind of bypasses something that, I'm not really quite sure how to put it, but basically it's I think there are things that we can't get too specific. And that's, if you read this thing, one of the little things I put in there is I would like to see the Board of Trustees repeal ordinance, I think it's ordinance 2 of 2002.
Right.
Which, it basically adopts a specific building code. And
Yeah.
I not only want to repeal that, I do not want to replace it with adopting a more current code. Because I don't think we're capable. If all we do is say, we adopt this code, we can't do it.
Right.
Let me give for,
And
because not everyone.
Would you mind holding for just a second?
Okay.
I see Sarah putting her coat on. I don't know who turned the heaters off, but
I did because it was 80 degrees.
well, would you mind turning them back on? Because I definitely feel the temperature coming down, so yeah. The sun's down and
Below
so,
the mountain.
And send it to let it, or them to let us know if that makes it too hard to hear.
right. So Lucinda, Roger, with the heaters on, let us know if that's a problem, but I know the last time when I listened in, I believe the heaters were on and I didn't have a problem, so. Yeah. All right, so Lone, go ahead.
Anyhow, I'll keep this pretty short, but the way it works in the big city and even lot smaller cities, but bigger than we are. I'll use the county as an example because with that, every 3 years, the county building department reviews the latest and greatest international building codes. And generally, the county, on purpose, stays about 3 years behind. When a new code comes out, they consider adopting the 3-year-old code. But they've got professional paid staff that are working on this. And the first thing they do is they go through, multiple people go through the entire international building code and all the different, there's electrical and this and all these different ones. Then the process is they make a list of things that they don't think the county wants to do. And that's presented to the planning commission, who knows nothing about building codes. And that they present what's going on and why they don't want these. Planning commission basically doesn't adopt that, but approves that and makes a recommendation to county commissioners who then adopt it. We just cannot do that. It's beyond our capability. And so that's why when I put this in here, I think what we've got, you know, it's kind of fuzzy from a technical standpoint, but to say that, you know, in Appendix A, and I'm gonna look up the exact wording again. It says, the International Residential Code is used as a standard and for the inspection of all foundation construction. And then the same about framing. And that's pretty vague, really, but I think it's good enough for us to be blunt about it. And this, I'm not saying anything against Tom. I think Tom does, to me, an amazing job as a building inspector, as did Brand Bukowski prior to that. But, you know, to adopt a building code or at any point in our discussions on either board to say, well, we got to follow this, the current building code or whatever. Exactly. We just don't have the capability to do it. And I think that's what everyone needs to understand. And, you know, the wording is kind of vague in Appendix A of the current code, current zoning code, but I think it's good enough.
All right.
Can I comment on that?
Yeah.
If,
You want to comment?
I'd like, well, okay. He yielded the floor to you, Ed.
So we have the current zoning code that has some building permit information in it. The town adopted.
Get closer to your mic.
Sorry. The town adopted ordinance number 2, series 2002. The ordinance of town of Pitkin adopting Uniform Building Code 1997, volume 1, basically in its entirety. And I believe if you ask Clayton, which one is really would stand up in the court of law, we need to be, because we have an ordinance that is stronger using 97 building code than what we have in here. This one won't stand a leg. And then the Appendix A saying in International Residential Code, not noting which version. International Residential Code started in 2000, and every 3 years, there's a new version for different things in that building code or expands it. As an example, if you go back to 2000, International Residential Code, you can build a support wall of 8 feet. There's no code for 9 feet. It's not until you go into later versions of 13, 12, 15, you go up through, then you can have support walls. I'll call it the library house down here that has an extended front wall. It's a support wall. So we can't, I think we better be careful with just saying, well, it's vague and we're good with just saying International Residential Code, because it gets our building inspector in a pickle. When someone says, well, it says International Residential Code, I'm going to build it off 2000 code. We've got to specify it. We also had Clayton at one of the meetings when he asked about inspections. We don't have inspections in here. In this ordinance in 97, it spells out real nice what the inspections are supposed to be and what we're supposed to follow for a final inspection and certificate of occupancy. And my opinion or my take is on it, we've got an ordinance already for 97. And until we can write a new ordinance, determining which International Residential Code we want to go to, this one stays in effect until we decide what we want to do. That's
Which code do you use, Tom? Which year? I mean.
Okay, so now this is an interesting subject.
Amen.
So here's the deal, guys. And we've got some stuff coming down the pipe, that the state will probably be mandating on us at some point. So for example, currently, with the 2018 IBC, your roof or attic or ceiling installation is supposed to be R49. The walls are supposed to make R25. The next one coming at us is R60 and R30. Now, these are starting to get really tough to do. The
Just,
49 and
just-
the 25 is still doable on through the 6 wall. Okay, so that's just, and so this is the reason that I really like architects, because architects draw to current code specifications. So as Ed was pointing out, under the 97 code, there are limitations to milled lumber that do not exist with engineered lumber. And so this wall down here, you know, here I get this set of plans and I went over with Browers and I looked up all kinds of stuff. And I discovered that if you've got an engineered piece of lumber, full 2x6 size, and you stand those things 16 inches on center, and then you put X quality of sheeting over top with a nail every 8 inches on it. This is for racking and shear force and wind. That is what, that meets current code. Now, that is way beyond 97 code. And so 97 does present a minimum standard, but it doesn't mean that we can't excel from that. And so, you know, I went over all that stuff and I looked up all kinds of stuff and I checked. So, you know, our values are important. Structural composition is important. Foundations are important. It's the same as it's always been. It's just they're getting more high tech in the materials that we use. And so you can get with closed self foam spray and insulation, you can get our values you would never achieve with fiberglass. And so there's this big package to look at. And so I've asked things that are far beyond what is required under the code that we're running under. On the other hand, as Ramon was pointing out here, I went to, I don't even remember what city it was. Maybe it was, I don't know, Aspen. And they had adopted some building code. They had, it was like a book of exceptions to this code. And so you're going to read the code, and then you're going to go to this book of exceptions, and then you're going to decipher what the code means in order so that you can apply it. And he's right. It takes an army. And so this is an interesting position, but here's the other thing. And I run across this regularly in my reading, and I do read here. For those towns that do not have a building code, someone else will step in and take care of that problem for you. Go ahead, Ed.
Just to that point, we had a realtor from Crested Butte come into town about 3 weeks ago, showing one of the houses here, and she commented about Irwin, the town of Irwin, having difficulty deciding how strong or how weak they want their building codes. And her comment was that the county of Gunnison is chomping at the bit to come into small towns that don't have building codes they're following to implement the 2021 building codes for the county. And it was scary talking to her, how she said she's seeing it in Irwin, how their people are saying, well, we need to pull back for the building codes. We need to make it easy for our people, and the county is wanting to come in to take over. That's what we don't, I don't think that's what we want to have happen.
And she didn't give you correct information. Irwin is not a town. Irwin was a town 100 years ago. Irwin is unincorporated county, which means they fall under the county rules.
And her comment was that even with Pitkin, if we're having some discussions on how vague the building permit or building code should be careful. Because the county would like to come in and if we don't have stringent enough building codes, I mean, I could see the state coming, like they want to come down on the WUI codes and the energy codes. And I think we need to be careful there that we don't back up and just say, well, we're gonna make it real simple for people to build. And we're forced to do something we don't want to do. And I'm hoping the energy code personally goes away. But I don't know if it will or not.
Yeah.
We're gonna have to make some strong decisions here in the next 2 years.
So to understand, Irwin is under the county codes. We are not, and the county does not want to tell us what to do.
Okay.
I'm telling you that. The county would like to ignore us as much as they ignore Gunnison and Crested Butte. Do your own thing. The county, they've told me, the building inspectors.
It's been the last year.
And the commissioners. We don't want to do anything in Pitkin. We got enough to handle outside Pitkin's borders, so.
I'm just saying we need to be careful because I'm not so.
Well,
Let's
be careful,
so
but what I'm saying is that we have to recognize our capability,
and I
our limitation.
and where I would say where to start with this is if she told you the town of Irwin is doing this, as Ramon said, there is no town of Irwin. The only thing that's regulated not by the county in Irwin is OWTS stuff, and that's regulated by the town of Crested Butte because of the concern it feeds into.
Sure.
So that's where I would be a little bit cautious if she's saying the town of Irwin's doing this. Well, but I would agree that, no, we don't want to hand over control. But I can tell you pretty much, at least in the past, I can't tell you for today, but in the past, there was any discussion about handing OWTS stuff over to the county, I can tell you, they were like, we want nothing to do with that. So the whole control issue is so I guess that's what I see is let's come up with something that we believe is reasonable among us that will hopefully keep the county from wanting to get involved or even worse, needing to get involved.
And I think on behalf of the zoning board, or it's on our bullet points of things for the zoning code we were looking at. That is some of the things that we've got on the bullet points to look at. Which code might we want to go to? I don't know if anybody else has done it, but I went back and pulled all the zoning code or all the building codes from 2000 forward and see the differences through. And it's books on each one. The differences now I say it's books, but is there huge differences? Probably not huge differences, but I think we could step up from 97 up to something a little more current. Still make it reasonable for people to build in Pitkin. Not make it so difficult on a building inspector that they're having to follow so many different exceptions. But I think the last thing we want to do is repeal this and say, well, we're just going to go with this because honestly, I think we'll be in trouble.
Well, and I think that's something that before we would ever do that, we would definitely run that past the attorney too and see what his thoughts are on it. And he's gonna be pretty strong about, we need to get some better policies in place. So that was pretty clear, I believe, from Clayton. We need to have some better policies. Galen,
While we're on this particular
agenda item.
Page 13 in the code, item 12, I would like a interpretation. I have heard two different interpretations of this number D at the top, and I would like clarification. I'll read it, but everybody can read their own if it's in front of them. All applications for building permits must be reviewed by 2 members of the Board of Zoning Adjustment for conformance to the code. Prior to the issuance of the building permit. Now, one way to interpret this is the reason the two zoning members sign that is to make sure it conforms to the code. To me, that's straightforward. However, I have heard the other argument that no, the zoning board members sign that building permit because they are equal signatories to the building inspector. What is it?
I'm not sure where that would have come from if it's not in there, but
Because I'm sure not that way. I don't want
so,
Tom's job. But I do want to reinforce or back him up that he is on the right page, that the setbacks are there and everything, the information's all there.
Applicable,
so that's the conformance that is spelled out in there.
right?
I don't see
signatures are there to
anything-
make sure
I don't see
it's not
anything-
in conflict with the zoning code.
I don't see anything there that says they're taking the building inspector's place or they're, so,
Well, yeah, this is Tom, and I have had, several ideas or plans come my way, and I'm going, no, you arrived at the wrong spot. You gotta apply this as zoning, you need the variance if you wanna set this or that or whatever. X amount of feet from the line, the setbacks are 10 feet, and you can't, I cannot
right,
sign my name to it. You gotta go get, and then my name is the last one on. Because that job of variances, which is heights and
right.
widths and setbacks or whatever, from this side or that side or some other side. And so conformance to the parameters set in this code is, a double check on me that I don't mind at all. To make sure that I haven't overstepped what I'm supposed to be taking to, which is actually the physical construction of a building.
Yeah.
So,
Go ahead, Ed.
Is there a specific example that you want to bring up?
Not at this time. I just want to clarify.
Okay.
So I think it is. I'd say it's pretty clear. So,
I'm just
yeah.
curious where it's coming from.
well, let's go back to our discussion on building.
Can we take a 1-minute break?
Sure. Break has been requested. We will take, in fact, we'll make it a,
Just flip the switch in the closet.
Okay.
It's just your left there.
To go to a different room.
Yes, you do. Yeah, so, if you get me started on building, we may be here a while.
well, and
So,
maybe,
somebody's gonna take
maybe,
specific questions.
well, and what comes to mind is this may need to have its own
Well, I think.
meeting. I think we're probably gonna need to have a work session. So what I would like to probably see is your recommendations on what you would like to see. And we could probably have the zoning board put together maybe what they would like to see. And then we, as the Board of Trustees, can say, okay, here's some ideas, and now, Mr. Attorney, how about a little guidance on top of that? That's kind of what I'm.
Can I just ask a quick question, since that's the topic right now? So considering the duties of the zoning board, which is to understand what happens in the various zones, what's allowed in the various zones and what's not. That's not, I mean, it's related and is supportive, and they work in conjunction with the building inspector, who essentially is kind of the building department. My question is not to advocate for creating yet another board, but is it a zoning board or is it a building commission?
Because it kind of seems like those are two very different things, but in the case here, we're having, there's a lot of overlap. And I think that, you know, in some cases, it's like that just a little bit of overlap that may have caused some confusion as to what the roles and responsibilities of the various parties have to
Well,
be.
And I think what I see is that hopefully this kind of follows along with what Clayton was trying to kind of promote was maybe we need to look at the zoning code and say, okay, there may be some additional responsibilities to look at building code, et cetera, in the future. Maybe we want to do that, maybe we don't. So that's something that, and if you would maybe reach out to Marble, Swatch, some fairly light communities and kind of see how they're trying to address these issues. One of the, what building code are they using and which edition, which year, which,
So
and how many exceptions do they have to that? And then also to see, as far as when it comes to the building part of it, is the zoning board, or do they have planning board, planning commission? Do they have somebody else that kind of oversees it? Or does it all fall on the inspector?
So I didn't bring my, because it's on our topic of agenda for the zoning board. The zoning board members had said we were gonna reach out or look at, research some of that previous meeting. I didn't bring it with me, but I've got a stack of, I went to the websites of all the different towns and found a bunch of their, what version they're using, exceptions and that kind of stuff.
Right, well, if you could provide that to Sarah, that would help in what we were just talking about. And then did you hear my, so what I was saying is, I think we should reach out to like communities and see kind of how they are addressing what we're talking about right now. What are the responsibilities of the inspector? Is it really his purview as to which building code gets followed? And also when it comes to the building part of it, how much is a zoning board involved in that part of it? Or is there another, as Sarah said, maybe there's another board, maybe it's a planning board, something else, or how does that work?
Yes, some of it, I don't have all of them. I was looking specifically
Just hold it.
what version of building code they use.
Okay, and, oh, go ahead.
Yes, yeah, I'm gonna give you a builder's perspective. Once you pay an architect or an engineer to structurally engineer a structure, it's gonna be everything from the footings to the roof to make sure that it is structurally sound for the altitude in Pitkin, Colorado, which is almost 100 pounds per square foot snow load. And it goes on and on. It's gonna be, you know, a set of plans. But the only thing zoning board, building inspector, or anyone else is gonna do is to make sure that structure is built to those plans. We're not gonna recommend alterations to an engineered system unless you're an engineer and you can trump what some other engineer has already designed. But we need a Colorado stamped set of plans before you go forward with issuing a building permit in Pitkin, Colorado. You need one in Gunnison County to build something. And that way you'll have, you know, something structural. Now, will they meet, you know, building codes, universal building code or whatever? Yes and no, but they'll actually be custom fit for Pitkin, Colorado. And that's what you need. We don't have just, you know, a universal set of rules for Pitkin, Colorado. This foundations and roofs got to be designed for what we've got.
All right, thanks, Roger. Tom,
Okay, I'm gonna read for to you from this is 2024, I think. Colorado has no statewide building code. Building codes are primarily adopted and enforced at the local level, except where noted. And where noted is federal buildings and
Tribal.
hospitals and schools and stuff like
Tribal land.
that. Okay, so, building codes are primarily adopted and enforced. And so you asked, so here's what I would like, and I don't even know if you can do this. But Roger brought up the subject of the engineers have drawn. And as I pointed out earlier, with the increase in building technology, we've got TJIs that, you know, 16 inches tall will span 26 feet. You know, well, there ain't nothing like that in the
No.
97 code. And the same thing with walls and other stuff, and then R values, and then, you know, I got a notice that was left over in a box that Rand left me that said, building inspectors, please make sure that a Uber rod, the unified field, I don't forget, two fancy words, something rod, resistor rod or something, I forget.
Oh,
Anyway,
yes.
That's what took your ground up to.
Yep.
And make sure those
UFOR.
are in place.
It's a UFOR.
So, and then, so what I would like is to be able, when plans come through, to just go ahead and spend my time, make sure that this guy's actually does know, because I've had a few that, and I get increasingly smart because the span tables for TJIs and all that stuff, whichever series they are, you know, there's about 4 or 5 series or, you know, web trusses or whatever. I would like to stay with as old a code as possible with the option to adopt any, I don't even know what the word is.
Portion.
Go ahead.
I'm not sure what the word is, but I think the discussions you and I had were most people in town, if they're gonna have a contractor build a house, they're gonna have engineered plans, which are gonna be brought up to the newer codes, is what the engineers will use. You can use probably 18 or maybe 21 codes. And I think we accept that as that's what they're gonna build to. However, the caveat is those people in town that might come in and say, I want to build my own place. Then we have to have something that we can at least fall back to an older code that they can fall back to. We have to do at least this. And then if it's beyond whatever that code is, whether it's 97, 15, 12, whatever, if it's beyond that, then we say it's got to be engineered. If you're going to build a house with the 20-foot walls, because the 15 code already doesn't cover that, then it would have to be an engineered plans. And I don't know if we can do that.
So we'd have to have some set of criteria that would say, okay, number one, if it's engineered, the building inspector is basically going to review to make sure that it as built to what the engineer designed. If they come in and say they want to build their own without an engineered plan, then we're going to have some kind of criteria to say, okay, you're going to have to build us to whatever code we decide. That's what you're going to need to follow. To me, it's maybe opens a bit of a can of worms. I think this is something, I kind of like the idea, but I think it's something we should probably present to the attorney and say, this is kind of what we're considering. Are we spending way too much time going in the wrong direction, or is this something that we can do? And I get your.
Well, so well, the 97 code, I have a job description here from the town of Pitkin for that
Right,
when Phil and whoever else was in that, and it covers everything from your foundation and steel to, your floor plan and your wall thicknesses and your TJIs and everything spec'd and so forth and so on. If somebody wanted to build their own structure and they wanted to design it themselves, there is a level of building at which I would become uncomfortable saying, yeah, that's okay. There is a level of building at which I'm comfortable saying, oh, that's just great, go for it. You know, we've done this 100 times. We know exactly what this looks like. And we'll just write it up here and you'll be good to go. So I don't want to pick on anybody, but I'll take Jake down here, for example. He wanted to put those extensions out there, with some porches outside.
right.
And he said, did he need to get that engineered? And I said, well, you could, except I've got probably 15 engineered plans that look pretty much just exactly like what you're going to do in the file cabinet here. Why don't we just take one of those out? And you make your footage to do this, you make your post to do that, you make your top beam to do that, and you put your 2x6s on 12-inch centers, and that way you split your 24-inch that you've got up there on the trusses, and you put it in with it and cover with your sheeting, and then cover with your whatever, and then you put your 10 on top, and that'll be fine. It's well built. It's just fine. It's not. Is it engineered? Actually, it is. It's engineered off of how many other plans? So, but to move past that into some other areas. So, for example, I know what a 2x12 per rafter on 16-inch centers with 5/8 sheeting with nail every 8 inches. I know what the span load is on 13 and a half feet, you're gonna, or more,
You're gonna have a problem.
Our snow load. But anyway, I'm rambling. I have no problem with the things that I have to do. Now, there's some things that come up from time to time. ADH keeps changing the rules and some other things. And so I will say that the hotel has been a pretty much everyday learning event in some fashion. And they've done a real good job down there. And we've had some real professionals on the job. Mr. Wise, who's the plumber, man, that guy's a pro. And Mr. Duff, the electrician, and that crew, they're pros. And then he's got some really good framers, and he's got actually the engineer drew up a pretty good set of plans. So it's other than, wandering through and saying, well, you got a couple of fire blocks up here, you get those in, little stuff.
Right.
So that's not been a problem. Once upon a time, we had a discussion about, remember when people could come to town, set their piers, get a D-log cabin kit, and build their little summer fishing cabin. Remember?
Yes.
And we're going, well, okay, so what's wrong with that? Well, really, the only thing wrong with it is your piers need to be in the ground far enough to hold it up. And if it's just going to be a fishing cabin and you're only going to be here 2 months of the summer, that's one thing. But we don't have that option much anymore. And so we have our values in the roof and our values in the wall and all kinds of other things that we have to compel people to do.
So what if we took this approach? Someone comes in, they present engineered plan. Okay. That's good. We're not gonna worry about the building code, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Somebody else comes in and says, you know what? I want to build my fishing cabin or whatever, and I don't want to have it engineered. And we say, okay, you know what? You need to follow what we have on the books already. which is the 1997 building code.
Which should be.
And if they, when they start building and they find out, hey, you know, we could use some new technology and we could do this or that, and it's not in the 97 code, then we say, you know what? You're gonna have to have that engineer. Does that seem like a decent approach or not?
I think that's a viable. I'll back up and say, I think you were correct earlier when you said we need to have this table this and pull it in.
And do that. Okay, and I'm fine with that. So what I would like then is zoning board, building inspector, board of trustees, anybody's got some input, let's try and get it put together. So we have a little bit of a guideline for the agenda for when we come up with that meeting.
My cliff notes is I really like Ramon's statement, first of all, when we very first started this subject, keeping it as simple as possible. But CYA, when Rand resigned as building inspector, it got dumped on the zoning board. And at that point, our board decided that the way we would cover our backsides was to have certified bonded engineers create the blueprints. That took the monkey off of the zoning board in the town of Pitkin. Now, we didn't specify 1997 or 2017 or 2012. We put the monkey on the engineer. Now that we have a competent building inspector, he is sharp enough to follow that engineered blueprint to make sure that the builder follows the directions of the blueprint. So there needs to be a compromise all the way from Ramon and I want to build the old shack that doesn't even have any insulation in it, just the summertime, keep the rain off of us. And the one that wants to be here in the nastiest blizzard that still meets the requirements from state and county and satisfies our attorney that we are. My tendency is if you want a slight insulation and pay high utility bills, that's your problem. But they've taken that away from us. So we need a uniform code that Phil and Todd, for example, can live up to.
So I'm gonna cut you off, if you don't
Okay.
mind. What we're talking about is we're gonna have another work session just to address this. All right? So
Fantastic.
let's move on.
Amen.
Before we move, I don't mean brought up, do you want that as a joint board of trustees and zoning board meeting
Yes,
workshop?
yes.
Clarity.
Did we ever clarify if there is another, discontent with the zoning? I mean, with the building inspector's verdict on a permit, who does it get appealed to? Because it was my understanding he works for the town,
So
the zoning board, and so I think we need to clarify. I could be wrong.
what we're talking about is this sheet that we're gonna put together. It's gonna have it lined out. If this is denied by the building inspector, then it goes to this point.
You don't
So-
know what point that is yet.
We're going to put all that into a sheet.
Okay.
So what I'm asking Sarah to do is to go back and review what we have in place right now and see if we already have steps. And if we don't, then we're going to develop that. And we don't have that form tonight, so
Okay.
that's gonna be in the future.
So
All right?
can I add something else to that? I guess it's kind of in the roles and hierarchy. But that is something I ran across. It dawned on me as I'm reading through the code on page 13 on section 17 building permits on the OWTS section on E. No residential business building permit for new construction shall be issued until the professional engineer OWS and water supply design have been presented to the zoning board of adjustments. Now, perhaps in the last year, we've not had any new construction, but I know the zoning board in the last year while I've been on it, we have not looked at any OWTS systems. So I don't, And then my question was, okay, new construction, is that new construction of a house or a new construction of no WTS system? I don't know. And then I just think we need to clarify.
It is a good
It,
thing to
it
clarify.
says building permit, and you don't get a building permit,
With an OWTS.
Yeah, no WTS.
right? So it's because there's a requirement for there to be a well and no WTS for a house.
Right. And I'm okay with that, but I'm just saying in the last year, I don't know, maybe we haven't had a new construction. I'm thinking of Figurados, but that's probably
That's
going
over
on
a
2
year ago.
years. Probably close to 2 years. So I just, as I'm reading it, it dawned on me like, we've not looked at it.
Yeah, so
And
does that clarify that? If there's a building permit,
in the code for a new construction, but I question then, do we need to change that part of the zoning code? Why is it only for new construction?
Go
so,
down to F, it adjusts if you're adding on to it. You were on E, and if you go
Yeah,
to F,
I was on the. Well, E addresses, it needs to be presented to the zoning board, but F does not.
but specifies the inspection and also the capacity that will qualify for the addition or the change.
So if you look at F, it says that all needs to be included in the building permit. So that would go to the building inspector and would be part of the packet that the zoning board would review for conformance to the code. 'Cause I'm assuming that when the zoning board members review a building permit, they review the site plan and everything that's included for conformance to the code. And so it says it has to be included in the building permit. So that's where it's presented. It's given to the building inspector.
And you're saying that in the zoning board, with the 2 zoning board members signing off on the permit, would look at it.
Well,
That-
that's what it says. It says
I-
must be included in the building permit, and so that's the responsibility of the zoning code is to review the permit for
Correct.
conformance. So yeah, it would be the 2 members.
So be
who
it
would-
2, whoever signed, the
Right.
2 members.
so we're good there?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, well, we've kind of started with this already. The next item on the agenda was discuss the clerk's role with regard to the duties and functions of the zoning board. I think we discussed that, and we're going to put together, as you mentioned, a job description, so I think that'll cover that. Then the next one is discuss the building inspector role and responsibilities. So I guess to me, if we can do the same thing, we build a job description. Is that? I think that's,
So can I interject here?
sure,
I'm not saying a job description is inappropriate, because I think it is. If somebody is doing a job, the town needs to lay out what it is that it's asking the person to do. I do think it's important to keep know that currently the town pays its building inspector as an independent contractor. So within the job description, there can be requirements such as complete all inspections or, sign all permits. But it is the responsibility of the person who's hired to determine how and when those duties are carried out. So there has to be some consideration for the rules regarding how independent contractors are managed.
so what I would suggest is this, if you can do a little investigation survey and see, especially if you can find some communities where the building inspector is just under contract versus where the building inspector is an employee, and then we can look at that and hopefully come up with a good way to address that.
I think Tom would be an excellent source of information as to what he feels he is doing in order to justify the fulfillment of the position of building inspector.
Tom, did you say you had, or you had pulled a job description previously for the building inspector? Did you say you hadn't?
Yeah, it's an old, one.
Yeah.
It's the one from when previous people were building inspectors.
So I
It's not a job description, it's just a checklist of what you
Okay.
check.
Yeah,
You check the footings, you check the rebar, you check the.
yeah. It was more of a on the job, here's what you need to be doing versus,
no, all I was
Jesus.
looking for was if it was a job description, something to start with.
right,
If this is
Yeah,
what you
so-
do, well, then this is what you do. So-
Right, yeah. So. And yes, Tom will definitely be involved in as we develop, whether it comes down to a job description or whatever we call it. And if it becomes, whether it's an employee or we continue with a contract, Tom will have lots of input for that. So,
And even, and this is probably some of the investigation, even if it's a contract position, someone still will manage, quote, that employee. In either the board of trustees, the zoning board, someone manages that employee.
Not, so maybe it's the word managed that's really throwing me off here. The definition of an independent contractor is that they are not managed.
Well,
what we do is we develop a criteria,
And then you hire somebody to
That-
do that job,
right?
and then they do the job.
Yeah,
and here's maybe
And-
where the confusion's coming in, because your version of a contract person is they stand solely on their own.
Yeah.
For 4 years, I was a contract employee to General Motors. And I not only had a contractor manager, but I had a GM employee, a GM manager as well. So even if we have a contractor, they still report to someone on the town. That is.
and what I would say is ultimately they report to the board. And the step before that is they would report to the mayor. And if there's discussions, if there's something needs to change or whatever, then the board would take, or the mayor would take that to the board, and that's,
So I think it's important to put that in the job description. So whoever that
It-
person is, they know who they're reporting to, and we know the hierarchy
yes,
and the structure.
there'll be a level. This is report level.
Because I'll go back to anybody in management. When you have people that work for you, you have to inspect what they expect. Well, if they don't know what to expect by job description, it's total chaos.
One of the most important things of management is relaying your expectations and listening to their expectations and coming together. So they're both understood, so.
With Dustin Valley excavating and snow removal, I go over, which happens to be Jim the last 3 years or so. Start with, we want to leave layer. And then when we get to where we need to go wider because of wind or something, then I change and ask, and he always jumps to
Right.
the challenge. So he has somebody basically to answer to, but he is a contract laborer, right?
Yes,
Right, correct. So with a contract laborer, the town directs the outcome. We want to
Yes.
plow the street. And if they want to come and plow with a hand shovel, all right. You know, so.
But
the
we've-
town-
But he needs to leave 6 inches on the ground packed in, or he wants to go 30 feet wide, or what? Yes.
Right, those are all results.
We
that
develop
the
a-
town requires.
we develop a set of expectations, what the town wants, and then whether we do that as a contract, like we've been doing with the snow removal, or we do it as an employee like we do with Sarah, that's. All right, next thing on the agenda, it says the zoning board may be dismissed if you guys want to leave, or sorry, Ed, you just turn your hat the other way. So,
Do we need to join the audience, or can we still? sit
no,
here?
you can sit right where you're sitting, so. So the next thing on the agenda is discuss commissioner roles and responsibilities. So right along with what we've been talking about, developing some job descriptions. I think we need to get some job descriptions developed for all of the commissioner positions.
Well, we do have
And-
that.
and we have them,
Yeah. They
and
may need to be refined.
I guess that's my concern is exactly how well are they defined and do they need to be updated, revised, et cetera?
So could you, if we have something already, could you send them out? So we can see.
Yes.
I did send them out. I sent
Yeah.
an ordinance in the email that I sent.
Oh,
everybody.
they're the ones in the ordinance.
Yeah, so if you review the ordinance, you can
I
see
did.
that within it, there were all the job descriptions.
Not what I would consider a jump description. That's,
Yeah, and so I think that's kind of what we're talking about is, I think we need to review those job descriptions for the commissioners and define those better. And especially the responsibilities thereof. Well, we're talking about commissioner roles, so
Well, I just want to say over the past 4 years, probably the EHH position has changed and changed and then changed back and it's even changed again because a new engineer, Gunnison, that has had a little difficulty figuring out his role as far as Pitkin goes. And sent a letter to Cusino and he responded and verified my position that yes, it is the engineer's duty to find out where the well would go. But for the last 2 weeks, my partner and I have had to tromp all around trespassing on people's property to measure distances to see how this isn't going to work or how this might work. And it's very time consuming. And I finally got after the engineer and I think it's had an effect, but.
and here's what I would say, and it goes back to a lot of what we discussed in the early part of this meeting was the applicant's responsibility. And you know what? If they hire an engineer, and that engineer doesn't do their duty, they don't do what they're supposed to do. And you as the environmental health agent review it and say, you know what? This does not meet the requirements of the state or the town. That goes back to the applicant who needs to, this is the way I look at it, is a lot of this discussion, instead of between you and the engineer, needs to be between you and the applicant. Let the applicant take the responsibility for, and if the applicant,
Engineer.
if the applicant comes back to you and says, you know what, I don't really understand this, I don't know if the engineer's doing right or what, they ask you to help with that, I'm okay with that. But I think the primary direction should be from you back to the applicant to say, you know what, here's the checklist. Wait a minute, these are missing. And it's up to the applicant to get with the engineer. Is that?
Yeah.
Okay. So while we're talking about, we're going to move on down to the next one. It says discretionary spending. So I can tell you the government entities that I've worked for, typically, depending on what level of employee you're at, you had some discretion about how much you could spend of government funds. Depending on if you're just a regular employee, you might be able to spend $100. If you're a management employee, it might be 500, but there was typically some level of discretionary spending that if you wanted to go above that or beyond that, you had to go to management or to the board. And I think that that's something that the town of Pitkin needs to develop, is some guidance on discretionary spending. How much are we as a board comfortable with saying Jesse or Gayla or Mark or whoever or Ramon can spend without coming to the board for approval. So I think we need to develop that. We don't have that in place now, but that's the direction I would like to see.
I agree totally, because I'm in a position now of looking at both sides of it. You know, previously when I was on the board, and I'm gonna use Jesse as an example, primarily because streets require a lot of money.
Try and get a little closer if you could.
And so there was always this question in my mind when Jesse would present a bill or whatever, especially if it already been done or a purchase, like when you bought the big group of culverts or something. You know, should this be done? Should he have asked ahead of time, or was this fine and we just approve it after the fact? And there's, you know, I'm with you. I'm unaware of anything that answers that question. And now I'm on the other side too, as the town hall commissioner, is if I want to do this or this or this, can I just do it and present the bill to the board, or do I have to go to the board first? I haven't got any guidance to tell me that. So I think that that's needed and needed quickly.
Yes. Okay.
I think you're right on track, because I have two instances right now that, first of all, I have signed an agreement with United Materials to get in 6 loads of 30-ton, 3/4 road base. And I want them delivered and spread prior to Business Sparky at the county level to come in with the water truck and the road grader and prepare our surfaces, and then come in the next day and re-wet and mag chloride. And so I've made those arrangements, but I didn't actually have a direct, the one that really concerned me, the gravel is not a problem because it's basically the same price as last year. But mag chloride's 20 cents a gallon higher this year. And so I felt like if I put mag chloride on State Street from 1st to 9th, I better put it on 9th to the end of town. I better put it on River Street so I have the same streets as last year. But it would probably make me sleep easier to know that I'm back, that's what I'm supposed to be doing.
Well, I think that's exactly why we're here. What we need to do is we need to develop, and as Ramon said, we need to get this done pretty quickly.
Yes.
And it's not going to be the same level for the town hall commissioner as it is for the street commissioner, as it is for the town clerk, as it is for anyone else. So what I would task Sarah with some more is to basically develop a table with each position that is going to have approval for discretionary spending. And if you would look at the budget and see if you could provide us with a good place to start for discussion.
Yeah.
All right. Instead of us sitting here trying to come up and say, well, let's see, there's 500 there. I'd like to come, and when you develop the table, if you would put the budget for that line item in there, so that way we know, okay, well, this person has $5,000 for the year. This person has $20,000 for the year. And then we can start to develop some of that.
Sure, and just so the board knows, what I'll do is I'll also kind of look at our historical spending. So, you know, for the past 3 summers, if we spent $3 grand on gravel, then that may be a place to start. You can spend up to $3 grand on gravel, but if you want to spend more than that, you got to check with the town, because that should cover what the town has historically used and approved over the past several years. So I'll look at all that data when working on this table.
Okay, and I think that's, you know, it's a great example, Jesse, what you said. Gravel's the same price, but mag chloride's gone up.
wasn't.
So we've got to look at the budget, and unless we put in a budget to be able to accommodate that extra amount, then we're gonna have to cut somewhere. Or redirect somewhere. So luckily, we've got a little bit of time before they start bringing in gravel or not.
A little bit.
I mean, what's the proposed timeline?
Proposed time for gravel is mid-June.
Okay,
And,
good.
the next week is the water and grading. And then the
And then
next day is
mag
water.
chloride over that.
Right, preferably before July 1st. And
Okay,
Sparky hasn't given me the date.
okay,
They're not doing 44 this year. So it's a special trip up here to do our streets. Now, they've even changed Ohio City, so we're kind of stepchild again.
I can have it ready by the trustees meeting.
okay. That'd be good.
May's good.
That would be good. If we
I
can have
appreciate
that,
that.
then we'll have that on the agenda for discussion.
And you got
Other-
that for ditch chairman or commissioner, we don't have yet too, so if you'll share that with me. It's kind of related to the streets, but it's kind of a separate.
Movie?
What?
Oh, this is somebody on the,
Oh,
somebody else.
Volunteer.
Pete, you have a comment?
No.
Yes,
Okay, I'm just gonna mute him.
So along that same line, you put on discretionary spending to include clerk or Sarah.
right.
So can she look back like over the last year or 2 years? And I'm guessing it's office supplies that she spends, I guess.
Well, there's been phone, there's been Starlink, there's been,
Yeah. So, well, the PHCA bought Starlink, we don't have our invoice from them yet. I need to actually contact them about that. But yeah, I have a budget and I pay for, things that just, it's mostly postage. About every 4 years I buy toner because I don't ever use the printer at town hall because I don't want to walk up there. So, it's things like that. I think there have been 2 times in the 8 years that I've been clerk that I have purchased something. And one thing was under the direction of the board, it just we hadn't decided on an amount, and that was the speaker.
Yeah.
But other than that, it's minor postage, office supplies.
And that's what I
And it's-
presume for her was minor office supply stuff. So maybe it's take an average of what it was for the last 3 years and next year discretionary spending.
Well, that's-
typically just follow my budget.
yeah. And I think what it comes down to is that's why I asked for a table, because that's gonna be the job of the board to look at it and say, okay, yes,
No question.
X amount, right? And I mean, one of the other ones is you got it in your hand right there. She purchased the microphones and stuff, so. And that was at the direction of the board.
That would
but-
be under discretionary spending, I wouldn't think, because it's a one-off. item.
Okay, so what I would say on that is to replace one of these or 2 of them, they're not working. That's all things that I would say is discretionary spending, that's why we gotta develop an amount to say, this is it, and above that needs to come to the board.
Well, because above that, it would be if you had who knows what the next new gizmo would be, then we would look at it for the, how we need to do that for every.
Right. I mean, if it goes above that amount, doesn't matter who it is, whether it's Jesse or Sarah or Gayla or whoever, if it goes above their amount that we've set for discretionary, then it'll have to come to the board.
And I would ask Sarah to tell me when she gets those bills, if I'm getting there. After we did establish that mile marker, because I think I'm finally getting everybody where they will bill the town of Pitkin directly instead of me doing my credit card and then requesting a reimbursement. And I like straight to the town so much better.
Right, and I will point out, that does happen with, all the trucking companies, the gravel companies, they send it to us directly. And if you'd like, I can forwarding copies of those, but it is in the duties and responsibilities to manage the budget for each commission, and I'm happy to help with that. But I think it'd be best if the commissioner and the treasurer are both fully aware of the spending that's happening and the, outstanding bills and things like that to kind of keep track of the budget.
So I think that's exactly what we're just talking about here. Whether it's Ramon looking at something for town hall and saying, you know what, we need to get this and it's above my discretionary spending. What I see is it's up to him to bring the justification to the board for whatever he's asking for, whether it's Ramon or Jesse or Gaylor or whoever. That's what I see is don't just come in and say, well, I need another $1,000. Okay, for what? Why? And as you've already started down that road,
That I and Jesse and others need is that, what is that policy? So we know. when-
That way you
can go
got-
Buy a fire alarm, smoke detector,
Yeah.
and not have to
That's
contact
on
them,
my list.
right,
not contact the trustees to do it.
so
They're done.
hopefully I think we got clarification on that, where we're headed and what we want. Any other more discussion on that item? All right. So the next thing is, I think we need to look at, and it's already been mentioned a little bit, whether we're a contract employee or a contract with the town or an employee of the town. And I think Jesse's position is one of those, and it's been mentioned in fact, I think Ed probably brought it up about pay for the street commissioner. So the work that the street commissioner does. So I think that that's something we need to have a discussion. Do we want to look at having the street commissioner, having that as a contract for getting the work, for work other than where we're hiring outside, like the county or whoever to do gravel or mag chloride or something like that? Are we looking at having Jesse as an employee, or do we want to have that, like what we're doing with some of the other stuff, as a contract?
Yeah, Sarah and I have visited just recently on this, and I don't know how we did it last year. You and Sarah and maybe our previous attorney did something, so we didn't have to do some kind of a W-2 or what was it?
No, so we were talking about a 1099, and this was with our auditor.
Yes.
Is it fine if we go here? So the situation was that at some time in history, and I don't recall the exact details, because I don't know that this happened at a meeting or if it was just a phone discussion. But at some time in history, there was reimbursement for use of the tractor. And that reimbursement rate for many, many years was $35. And the intention of that was to cover, gas, wear and tear, oil change, that kind of thing. So, and that fee, the earliest that I could find, that particular figure was when Lisa was streets commissioner. So 8 years ago and prior to that. And she used Rand's tractor to spread gravel and things like that. At some point, in fairly more recent history, that changed to $50 an hour, and I don't recall the discussion surrounding that. So I can't really comment on how or when or why that happened. But I believe it was 2 years ago for our last full audit, there was a question about whether or not the town should be sending Jesse a 1099 for all of the amount of money that the town was paying him for the use of his tractor. And during the course of that discussion, it was expressed to me that that was reimbursement for wear and tear, gas, oil on the tractor. And when I brought that to our auditor, he asked a couple clarifying questions, such as, well, are you renting the tractor? Are you hiring the tractor? And I said, no, just reimbursing the cost of using the tractor. And he didn't ask how the amount was arrived at. And he said, then you don't have to send a 1099, because it's like if Jesse bought a gallon of gas and we paid him back for that gallon of gas, it's just reimbursement. And so no 1099 was sent out. And then in our last conversation, Jesse expressed to me that the town was renting his tractor. And that the 50 was not an actual reimbursement cost, it was a rental cost, which is different.
And I don't know how it was classified, but I did not report it last year as income. And so my question is, it's reimbursement, but it does all those things, but it also pays for depreciation. I'm losing value in that vehicle. And the operator is free at this point.
And that's what we've been talking about too, is
Yes. And so I didn't feel like that I needed to be reporting it as income, but I want to keep the town and Jesse's nose clean. So I don't want an audit. If I get an audit, I want to be able to pass it.
sure.
I pay an accountant quite a bit of money to do that. We still itemize. But it's getting to be a serious number, especially right now. A couple, 3 weeks ago, you mentioned you wanted Sarah to put out bids for a contractor to come in on ditches. Well, the reality of that is it's going to be too late for 24. Time we get it. Our notices, I've been watching the post office. There's no notice of somebody wanting to be a contractor to dig ditches for us.
Is it online?
Not yet.
Yeah.
I haven't seen anything. Anyway,
No,
my
I don't
point-
have that posted. I just found an example that I could use. And we were just talking about how many miles of ditches there were, because I felt like that might be important to include in the RFP, approximately what the scope of work was, and I needed to gather some information. So no, that's true. It's not up yet. But kind of getting back to the situation at hand, which is that was income. And so now the town is in a position where we have not given a 1099 to somebody who is earning income. You know, I don't know what you were using to calculate your depreciation rate, but that's something that is separate from the town. It's not the town's job to, you have to like do that reporting with your accountants.
See, like I didn't list the $700 auger that I tore up out here on a rock, a year ago on my snow blower.
But that's my point.
So
is that
I haven't been turning in those bills.
And so I think that's where we need to look at this and say, you know what? You're gonna have to have if you want to look at it this way, you're gonna have to have a rental rate to cover your costs. I mean, that's the way I would look at it, is if you're gonna tear up an auger, if you're gonna have wear and tear, you wanna have enough.
I don't
I'm
want to
gonna
lose
call it
money
income,
out.
right? I'm gonna say you're gonna have enough income to cover that and to cover depreciation, et cetera. So if you're looking at doing it that way,
Then we need to
then
treat it as a rent.
we need to treat it as a rental, not as a reimbursement, but as a rental. And make sure that way you're gonna get a 1099 from us. So when the auditors start looking at what we're doing, it'll be very clear to them. And they'll be able to say, okay, you guys are doing it the right way.
If I get a 1099, I will show it as income, period.
Right.
Deposit
Yeah,
in
whether
your
you,
market.
whether you do it as rent or however you
Yeah,
do it,
it's
that's up to you, but that's what we're looking at is,
Well, and then just to kind of add on to that same idea, you know, when the town secures a person or personnel or a company in order to provide a service for the town is required to request bids if it's more than X amount of money. So then essentially for the, you know, and again, not looking backwards, but moving forward, because of the amount of money that the town is spending on this particular service, the town needs to secure bids. The town needs to compare prices from different providers of this service and not just, moving forward, we need to clean it up. It's really messy right now. And while I am not prescribing any malintent on anybody's part, absolutely not, because I know that everybody at this table loves Pitkin
and wants the best for Pitkin, it's really messy right now.
And
We
that's,
need to clean it up.
and that's why I said we're gonna put out an RFP for cleaning the ditches. Because what happened last year is, maybe it was my misunderstanding or what, but I thought there was gonna be a volunteer effort to clean the ditches.
Right.
And
And
didn't
then-
show up.
And then, well, but then we got a bill for equipment. And if we
We got
haven't,
3 bills for it.
and if we don't provide 1099s for that and show this is what we're doing, and if we can't say we put out an RFP to make sure that we're doing it the correct way, that's the problem. So that's why I've asked Sarah for this year, and I think we can get it out in time.
We can, I
mean-
can have it out no later than Monday.
We can get it out pretty quick, and
I'll put it in the newspaper.
And what we can do is we can put it like a lot of bids are. We're gonna have an on-site meeting to review, do a walkthrough. And we can do a walkthrough and say, okay, this is what we want. We're gonna start here. We're gonna do this. We want it no wider than that. We want it no deeper than this. And they can figure out how much footage that they're gonna be doing. I don't think we even have to provide that. We don't have to say we want 1.2 miles. We're gonna say,
We won't need to do one, the
No.
whole,
right.
I turned
That's-
her in 35 blocks.
That's why I
I
wanted
want that computer to.
Well, it's about 2.5 miles, but
Yeah.
not every inch of the ditches needs. to be-
Needs it.
needs it. So that's why I want to do a walkthrough and be able to say, okay, this is the
Yeah.
expectation for that. And what I would suggest is, and everybody can chime in, but say, you know what? You give us a bid and you can break it down 2 ways. You can give us a lump sum bid for what we've described, or you can give us a per hour bid. And that way, if there's something additional that needs done, we'll have an amount there. Or we may be able to say, you know what, we don't have the money to do all of that. Here's what you're gonna do. So that's.
Gonna add a little bit to
Sure.
Get real close to
it. I
mine.
will.
You gotta almost have it in your mouth.
No, I gotta eat it. So I know Jesse brought this up to me a couple weeks ago, and I did a little bit of research on the 1099 miscellaneous. Unfortunately, our IRS changed the rules a couple years ago. And it even states that if you rent your tractor out, it is to be treated as an unearned income. And the 1099 miscellaneous, but whoever is receiving that benefit, like the town, is supposed to do it in 1099 miscellaneous. At the same time, I know it's been, I think, $50 an hour, as Sarah stated. If you go and rent a tractor like that, we're probably gonna pay $140, $160 an hour if you have to rent it. So I think that's up to if Jesse, as a street commissioner, wants to rent his tractor to the town. I think we have to be willing to pay the fair rate, and that's where it goes out to bid. And maybe he doesn't bid as high as what the normal going rate of a tractor is, it goes. However, we have to keep in mind that if we rent a tractor from somewhere else, we're gonna have to pay an employee or someone to go get that tractor and bring it back and forth.
So I've actually looked into a couple places. I talked to somebody, just this week. And they have a delivery and a pickup fee that's included. They have an insurance waiver that you
Okay.
could purchase if your town is not currently insured for equipment, which ours is not because we don't own any equipment.
Right.
But yeah, I've only talked to one place though, and there's one more. So these I can have available as well, and I plan to for the trustee meeting. And so this, I guess this wouldn't necessarily be for ditch work. This is more just for
Or-
the street work that's.
This is-
whether the town wants to continue renting, Severson's tractor, or whether it might be more economical to rent another piece of equipment. But that'll all be available at the next meeting.
That's right, I think that's fully needed.
Yeah.
To-
Jess, did you have some?
Well, this past week I've been to a lot of reading and everything, and the ditch commissioner, one of his challenges is to have the ditches on by April or May. We're already in May. And people are wondering why we don't have any fire ditches yet. And last fall, I even got some challenge that I kept them on too long. But, you know, I'm not the ditch commissioner. I function as that and I'm happy to because I want the town to have fire prevention as long as possible.
And I certainly appreciate it. I will tell you that.
Sure. So, like I've told you before, I wouldn't spend a dime for this town if I didn't, that I wouldn't spend out of my checkbook for this town, just like my farm. I would not spend a dime to level some ground if it didn't increase the value and make it more productive. And that's what I want for the town, is more productive and appreciative of what our ancestors have done so that we have even that paved street. I don't know how we got it, but I'm so thankful we have it. And our developed streets that we're trying to maintain and our bridges, all those things, we still have somewhat of a responsibility to future generations. I believe, for the sake of the town of Pitkin.
Yep.
So, it's kind of like Tom. I don't think anybody will have any more concern about the buildings of town, our homes and our sheds and all these than Tom does. We are blessed right now to have diligent people that totally care above and beyond their own self gratification or. Thank you.
Well, here's what I would say, just real quick. If somebody right now asked you why the ditches aren't on, you know what I would say?
You haven't prepared your ditch?
No, I would say we have an opening for ditch commissioner.
Oh, I have, yeah, I have.
That's number one. If you're concerned about why the ditches aren't on yet, then we have an opening for ditch commissioner. Then the next step is, have you cleaned the ditch in front of your property? And then the third thing I would say is, and I can verify this, driving up the street tonight, I was looking, we still have snow. And if we have snow in the ditch, that means we have ice in the ditch. You can't turn the water on until the ice is melted out, because underneath the street, it won't flow.
Right. And I'd like to report, we had a ditch commissioner the last 8 months. And he did a fantastic job.
Yeah, real good.
But I don't know why we should reimburse him anything, because I don't see that he did squat.
Well, they're just melting the snow out of the ditch right now. So, Sarah.
I just have a very quick question, and this can be answered later. Can somebody explain to me why the ditches are considered fire protection when they don't take water out of the ditch? They take it out of the creek.
No. If we have a fire on Main Street, we're sucking out those ditches.
Okay, that's all I wanted to know, because I keep hearing that, and I'm like, no, everybody goes to the creek.
And here's how I would answer that. If there's a fire anywhere close to town or close to my house, and I have a ditch pump in, I'm gonna be pumping water out of the ditch.
Absolutely.
So
Thank you.
that's my fire control part of it.
There's one other thing too, that people should be aware of. If the ditches aren't turned on, some of the wells on Main Street dry up.
Yes, that's right.
The ditches do recharge the aquifer. That's another important point. Yes, thank you. All right, so I think we've got the next couple things pretty much clarified. That's
It falls under this section, order of direction and chain of command. So without going into detail, I recently fielded a verbal complaint. This person did not want to make an official complaint, but they did want their concern expressed to the board. So I think a work session, since it wasn't an official complaint, would be a good place to do that. And their concern was a commissioner or commissioners performing jobs and duties around town, not at the direction of the board. And whether or not that was appropriate, if the commissioners really needed to have more direction and more requests from the board, or whether it's appropriate for commissioners to take requests from, various members of the public and then just.
So I think we're already headed in the direction to address that. We're
Okay.
gonna have better job descriptions
Yes, okay.
for the commissioners and employees or whatever. So hopefully we can put all of that in that. And there again, what I would say on that is some of it's going to be at the discretion of, and maybe we need to put that in there at the discretion of, okay, somebody mentions to Jesse, hey, there's a pothole over on 3rd and Main Street. Can he go fill it? Well,
Sure.
I think that's, as we develop this, there's gonna be some things he can do at the discretion of. And if it's developing a new street, then it's gonna be something that has to come through the board. So that's. With that, I'm gonna make one more thing on here. Hopefully everyone has already received this, but just as a reminder from the attorney, there will be no, emphasis, no discussion with Todd Adams about the camper situation. That applies to all the boards and commissioners and any town representative in any capacity. No discussion, period.
Someone complained to the attorney or something? Because I, again.
Let me
just
explain.
Be known.
So the way it is, I'm gonna make this very brief. Mr. Adams involved his attorney, and as soon as he involved his attorney, at the direction of our attorney, we are to have no discussion, period.
Well, we
Right.
shouldn't
So it
anyway.
needs to be clear.
That we
So-
shouldn't anyway, but that certainly makes it clear and answers my question.
All right.
Thank you.
That's typical.
Yes.
Nothing
Of
else?
course.
I say we adjourn the meeting. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. I think this was very fruitful tonight.
Me too.
I can give you a little history. You should know it. On the tractor and the charge. Right. And he bought the tractor.